Hi everyone, and welcome to the first episode of KrownStories, fairy tales reimagined for modern readers, a podcast from Krown Picture Books. Every week, we'll bring you a new fairy tale story or cliche that you thought you knew, with a twist. In honor of our first episode, let's celebrate another first in history today. On this day, October 8th, 1945, the microwave is patented. Now, for our first story. Today's story is about ferocious and evil dragons living on top of a mountain next to a small village called Ibetla. But are the dragons really that evil? Let's find out. Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, and yet close enough that if you closed your eyes and looked on the left, you could see it, a family of ferocious green dragons lived on top of a mountain next to a small village called Ibetla. And on this mountain, there was a small cave made of rock with 5 dragons inside who lived with one goal, to be as mean and scary to the people in Ibetla as possible. At least, that's what the townspeople thought. Every day, when the sun came up, the dragons would sing a song so loud that the people in the village would wake up and say, "Up there, up there! You hear those dragons? Look at the dragons singing songs so loudly we can't sleep." And every day at noon, when the dragons would exit their cave and fly around the rooftops of the village, the people would say, "Up there, up there! You see those dragons? Look at the dragons casting their shadows so we can't see the sun." And every night, when the people would go down to the river to wash their clothes and pots and pans, the dragons would splash around in the river and the people would say, "Over there, over there! You see those dragons? Look at the dragons splashing around in the water just to get us wet." But, as mean as the dragons were, the people never dared go talk to them because they were scared. And who could blame them? The dragons were very scary. And so even on the days when the dragons were singing on the top of their lungs, casting their biggest shadows, making the biggest splashes, and trying their very best to upset them, the people in the village did not say a word. At least, that was the case until one day a big, gray cloud appeared on top of the mountain. It was so big that it covered up the whole sun, and even in the middle of the day, it was as dark as night in the village. Clearly, this was the work of the dragons. Something had to be done. So, all the people in the village decided to have a town meeting to decide what to do about the cloud. And Martha from the village store brought candles so everyone could see in the dark. Alex from the haberdashery brought a thinking cap for ideas. And Leo the baker brought muffins in case anyone got hungry. Everyone brought their frustration. Look up there," said Martha, holding her candles. "You see what the dragons have done now?" said Leo, taking a bite of his muffin. "Somebody has to tell them to take this cloud down," said Alex, tapping his thinking cap. But who would go? Nobody raised their hand, so they decided to play a big game of rock, paper, scissors that went on for hours until finally someone lost. That someone was a girl named Tabitha, who must have been around your age at the time. And so, the next morning, all the townspeople gathered in the center of the village again and wished Tabitha luck. Now Tabitha was very nervous. She had never talked to a dragon before, so she had no idea what to expect. But she knew one thing. Dragons were very scary, and she remembered this thought as she left the town gates, crossed the river where the dragons splashed, turned right at the apple tree, and climbed up the path along the side of the mountain. She had only gone a few steps when she heard a terrible clanging and clashing sound that made the hair on her arms stand straight up. She thought she had imagined it, and so she continued walking, but the closer she got to the top of the mountain, the louder the noise got. Tabitha was terrified. She didn't want to keep going, but she knew the village was counting on her to get rid of the big gray cloud, and so she took a deep breath, counted to 10, and finally made her way to the mountaintop. Oh, it looks like it's time for our story break. Because of the theme of today's story, here's an interesting fact about dragons. In ancient Chinese mythology, it was believed that there was not one but 3 different types of dragons, which were all viewed as a sign of royalty. Okay, now back to our story. No one from the village had ever been to the dragon's mountaintop before, so they had no idea what it looked like. But Tabitha had always heard stories that it was like a desert. They said nothing grew there. There were no plants or animals, only dust and rocks. And instead of bushes, there were wads of trash and metal ends so sharp that you could get a paper cut just by looking at them. So imagine Tabitha's surprise when she got to the top and found that it was actually very beautiful. There were flowers of every color, and butterflies flew around them like they were in a ballet. The trees had leaves as soft as cotton balls, and lining the way to the dragon's cave, there were stones that glowed in the dark, so you could see despite the big gray cloud. But Tabitha still couldn't forget that she was there to talk to the dragons, and she couldn't forget that there was still a clanging and clashing sound that was even louder now that she was standing so close to the dragon's cave. So, being as brave as she possibly could, Tabitha followed the loud noise and the trail of glowing stones to the dragon's home. She had never been to a cave home before, so she wasn't sure whether she was supposed to knock to enter, and even if she did, she didn't know if the dragons would even hear it over the noise. Luckily, she didn't have to worry about this for too long, because in a few steps, she was standing at the front of the cave, face to face with an actual dragon, or really, 5 actual dragons, each holding pots and pans that they were banging together as loudly as possible. Tabitha stopped. The dragons stopped. There was a moment of total silence as Tabitha took in the sight of her first dragons, and the dragons took in the sight of their first Tabitha. The dragons were the first to break this silence. "Welcome," said one. "Welcome," said another. "We're so happy to have a guest in our home," said yet another dragon, and as if connected by an invisible string, all the dragons rushed over to Tabitha at once. Of course, Tabitha had never met any dragons before, so this all came as a terrifying shock to her, and she screamed. All the dragons stopped. "We're sorry," said one. "Did we scare you?" said another. "We didn't mean to scare you," said a third dragon. Tabitha was confused. "But you're dragons," she said. "You exist just to scare us and be as mean as possible." Now the dragons were confused, and even a little upset, because they never meant to make anyone unhappy. "Nobody told us that," said one dragon. "I don't understand," said another. "What did we do to make you upset?" asked another dragon. Tabitha thought of everything she knew about dragons. "You wake us up every morning with your songs. We can't sleep in past the sunrise because it's too loud." "We sing the songs to cheer you up because you're always so grumpy in the morning," said one dragon. Tabitha thought about this. It made sense. She said, "Every day at noon when the sun is out, you cast your shadows on us. We cast our shadows so you don't get sunburned. The sun is very strong at noon, and you never wear sunscreen," said the second dragon. This also made sense. The people in the village never wore sunscreen. She said, "Well, how come you always splash us with water when we're by the river?" "It's so nice in the river at that time of day. We splash you to get you to come in and play with us," said a third dragon. Everything the dragons had said so far had made perfect sense, but Tabitha was still not convinced. After all, it seemed crazy that the townspeople could have been scared of nothing the whole time, so she asked, "Well, how come you're making so much noise before?" "Ah," said yet another dragon, "we were just about to bake some of our fireberry muffins, but it's been so long since we last did that the pots and pans are all dirty. We were just banging the dust out." Tabitha was amazed. Perhaps the dragons weren't so bad after all. But she remembered one last thing, the thing that had brought her up to the mountain in the first place. She said, "If you dragons aren't evil, how do you explain this?" She pointed up to the giant cloud above her head. The dragons, unsure about what she was pointing at, came out of their cave and looked up at the cloud. "What's that?" asked the last dragon. "That's the big gray cloud that you put there that's put this whole village and your mountain in total darkness," said Tabitha. All the dragons shook their head. "You have to believe us. We didn't put any big gray cloud in the sky. We've been so busy trying to bake our fireberry muffins, we didn't even notice it was there," said the dragon. Tabitha looked at the dragons, who were just as confused about the cloud as she was, and she believed them. Maybe dragons weren't evil and mean like she had thought. "Well," she said, "if you didn't put the cloud up there, do you mind helping me find out who did?" "Of course," said all the dragons, and they brought out all their magnifying glasses and detective gear, and got to searching every inch of the mountain top. And they looked almost everywhere when they discovered a huge machine pumping gray clouds into the air. And running the machine was none other than Leo, the baker from the village. This was a huge shock to everyone, to Tabitha, to the dragons, even to the townspeople who had been watching silently from down below. Everyone let out a gasp. Leo, knowing he had done something wrong, stepped away from the machine. "I'm sorry," Leo said. "I didn't know what to do with all the smoke from the oven and the bakery, so I tried to send it up here, but I ended up just making this big gray cloud and ruining everyone's day." Luckily, one of the dragons was an expert in oven mechanics, and within a few minutes, the big gray cloud had disappeared. But Leo's embarrassment was still there. Everyone forgave him and told him it was no big deal, but he decided to move to the village of Elise instead to start a new life as a cloud maker. And now that the people and dragons had learned to understand each other, the dragons turned their beautiful mountaintop into a park for everyone to enjoy, moved into the village, started a new bakery, and finally got to make their fireberry muffins. And every morning, the dragons and the villagers would sing songs at the top of their lungs to cheer up. And in the afternoon, they all made sure to wear plenty of sunscreen so they wouldn't get sunburned. And every night, they would all play in the river together and have a great time. And so they all lived happily and understandably ever after. I hope you enjoyed our story today. Make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for a new story every Sunday. Also, if you want more stories like this, go to KrownPictureBooks.com and pre-order your copy of the picture book Princess Pretend in the Knot Night, coming fall 2017. Special thanks to On This Day and the FW.com for providing our historical event and fact of the day. Thank you for listening to the first episode of Krown Stories. See you next week!